The boarding gate was chaos. Business travelers with polished shoes, designer bags, and impatient stares. Among them, a young woman moved quietly, her gray hoodie pulled low, a faded backpack slung over one shoulder. When she stepped into the aircraft, whispers started almost immediately. "Wrong flight?" one man in a sharp suit muttered to his neighbor. "Looks like she belongs on the bus, not here." A woman in pearl smirked. She ignored them. Seat 12F. That's all she cared about. She slipped into her window seat, tucking the frayed backpack under the chair. Its army green fabric bore a patch, nearly invisible, unless you knew what you were looking for. The man beside her, gold watch gleaming, gave her one disapproving glance before burying himself in his tablet. The smell of his cologne filled the space, sharp and judgmental in its own way. The flight attendant stopped at her row. Her smile for the suited passengers was wide and practiced. For the girl in the hoodie, thin, cold. "Economy's in the back," she said flatly, ignoring the boarding pass in the woman's hand. A ripple of laughter spread through the cabin. The girl didn't react. She simply fastened her seatbelt, her face unreadable. But her fingers, calloused, steady, tightened briefly on the armrest. Hours later, as the plane cruised above the clouds, more small jabs came. "Hope you've got something better to wear for your job interview," the man with the Rolex sneered. Another woman leaned forward from the row behind, her voice syrupy sweet, but cutting. "Must be exciting for you. First time flying business class?" The cabin chuckled, but the girl in the hoodie finally turned her head, eyes dark and unwavering. Her voice was soft, but it sliced through the laughter like steel. "It's just a flight." The smirks faltered, silence settled, and for the first time the passengers sensed there was something about her they didn't understand. Dinner service began. Glasses clinked, silverware tapped, and the scent of warm meals filled the cabin. The attendant returned with menus, but only for the suited passengers. When she reached row 12, she handed one to the man with the Rolex, flashing him a smile. Her eyes flicked to the girl in the hoodie, then passed right over her. "I'm afraid we only have enough for our premium guests," she announced, just loud enough for nearby rows to hear. Snickers rose again. A man 2 seats ahead muttered, "Don't worry, she's used to fast food." The girl's hand paused on her water bottle. Slowly she looked up at the attendant. "Water's fine," she said evenly. Not a tremor in her voice, just final. The attendant blinked, thrown off by the calm. She moved on quickly, heels clicking faster against the aisle. But the passengers weren't finished. The man beside her leaned in again, voice heavy with arrogance. "You look like you're on your way to a job interview. Better have something sharper in that bag." The girl turned, her eyes locking onto his. For a long, silent second he forgot to breathe. "I'm good," she said, her tone smooth, steady and sharp as a drawn blade. His lips pressed shut. He sank back into his seat without another word. Moments later, the captain's voice broke through the cabin speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making a short stop at Andrews Air Force Base to refuel. Please remain seated." The name of the base stirred something in her. Maya's posture shifted ever so slightly. Her eyes lifted to the window where streaks of gray tarmac and distant hangars came into view. Fighter jets lined the runway like silent sentinels. Passengers noticed her change. The attendant narrowed her eyes. "Something catch your attention?" she asked, suspicion dripping from her tone. Maya didn't answer. She simply stared out at the rows of jets, her hand resting lightly on her backpack. For the first time, she allowed herself the smallest, almost imperceptible smile. And that's when the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The plane hadn't even landed, yet the passengers could feel it. This wasn't just any stop, and she wasn't just any passenger. The jet wheels touched the tarmac with a soft thud. Passengers stretched, checked their phones, and adjusted their ties, ready to step into their world of boardrooms and business calls. But Maya didn't move. Her gaze was locked out the window, fixed on the rows of fighter jets lined up like steel guardians under the sun. Then the cabin door opened. A man stepped in. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the uniform of a senior officer, his presence alone seemed to change the air in the cabin. Conversations faltered. Laughter died down. He walked the aisle like a storm rolling through. Colonel Ryan Steele. He shook hands with a few suited passengers in the front, nodding politely, but halfway down the cabin his eyes stopped, locked on 12F Maya. For a moment he didn't move, didn't blink. The passengers around him followed his gaze, confused. Finally his voice cut through the silence. Low, reverent. Shadowhawk 12, geese rippled through the rows. Heads turned, eyes darting between the officer and the girl in the hoodie. Maya's expression didn't change. She gave the smallest of nods. The man with the Rolex let out a sharp laugh. "You've got to be kidding. Her?" But Steele's jaw hardened. His voice rose, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My apologies, ma'am. You shouldn't have been seated here. You're needed on the tarmac. Now." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Phones slid discreetly out of pockets. Whispers spread like fire. Maya stood. She lifted her backpack with steady hands, slung it over her shoulder, and followed Steele down the aisle. Not once did she look back. When the door opened, a gust of air and the tang of jet fuel filled the cabin. The passengers craned their necks toward the windows. On the runway, a line of F-22 pilots stood in formation, waiting. Steele stepped aside, and his voice thundered across the tarmac. "Attention! Midnight Viper reporting." Every pilot snapped to salute in perfect unison, and there she was, Maya Carter, the girl they mocked, the one they dismissed. Returning the salute with crisp precision, her face calm, her presence commanding. Inside the plane, jaws dropped. Phones froze mid-recording. Not a word was spoken. The girl in the hoodie was no ordinary passenger. The wind whipped across the runway as Maya stood facing the line of pilots, their salutes still sharp in the air. For the first time, her shoulders seemed lighter, as though she had stepped back into a place she truly belonged. Then an officer approached, young, nervous, holding something wrapped carefully in both hands. He presented it to Colonel Steele, who turned and offered it to her. A flight helmet, old but well kept. The words Midnight Viper stitched boldly across its side. "This," Steele said, his voice carrying across the tarmac and straight into the cabin windows, "is awarded only to a pilot who has completed missions no record will ever admit. Missions that change the course of lives." Maya accepted the helmet, running her fingertips across the stitching. For a second the past flickered in her eyes. Tracer fire lighting up a midnight sky. Engines roaring, voices shouting over radios. Then she slipped the helmet under her arm, her movements smooth, practiced, natural. Gasps echoed from the passengers watching through the glass. The woman who had mocked her earlier covered her mouth. The man with the Rolex sank low in his seat, avoiding eye contact. But it wasn't over. Another pilot stepped forward, barely out of his 20s, his voice unsteady with emotion. He held out a weathered logbook, its pages creased and edges frayed. "You signed this for me 3 years ago," he said, opening it to a page where her call sign and signature stood sharp and undeniable. Maya looked down, her features softening for the first time. She placed her hand over the page and nodded. "You made it through," she said quietly, her words more powerful than any shout. The young pilot's eyes shone as he saluted again, shoulders straightening with pride. The others followed, their faces no longer unreadable but filled with respect and awe. Inside the cabin, silence pressed against every row. The passengers were no longer smirking, no longer whispering. They were staring at the girl they had ridiculed, now revealed as a legend walking among them. Maya turned back toward the plane, the helmet cradled under her arm, the logbook tucked safely into her backpack. Her steps were unhurried, deliberate, the kind of walk that needed no validation. And when she re-entered the cabin, the silence was absolute. The engines roared back to life as the plane prepared to lift off again. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, stealing glances at Maya as she settled quietly into 12F, helmet resting on her lap. Then it happened. A deep, thunderous sound rolled through the sky. Two F-22 Raptors rose alongside the aircraft, wings glinting like blades in the sun. The cabin tilted as dozens of faces pressed to the windows, disbelief turning into awe. The radio crackled to life. Colonel Steele's voice filled the cabin loud enough for every passenger to hear. "Midnight, Viper. We never got to thank you for last time." Maya reached for the headset she'd been given, sliding it on with steady hands. Her lips curved faintly as she leaned toward the glass. "Hold formation, Eagle One," she replied, her voice calm, commanding, alive with authority. From the headset came the immediate chorus of voices. "Yes, ma'am." Gasps rippled through the cabin. The man with the Rolex froze mid-sip. The influencer's phone slipped from her grip. Even the flight attendant's practiced smile faltered, her tray trembling slightly in her hands. No one mocked her now, no one dared. For the rest of the flight, silence reigned. Not the silence of arrogance, but of respect. Uneasy, heavy, reverent respect. When the plane touched down in D.C., the passengers filed out slowly, as if reluctant to move. Maya rose last, slinging her faded backpack over one shoulder, helmet cradled under her arm. She walked the aisle with her head high, each step echoing louder than the whispers. At the gate, a man waited. His presence was quiet but undeniable. His gaze locked on her the moment she appeared. His suit was simple, but the weight of who he was made the air tighten. Daniel Carter, her husband, a man whose influence stretched farther than most could imagine. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply nodded and fell into step beside her. The passengers who lingered near baggage claim fell silent once more. Phones dropped. Smirks vanished. No one needed an introduction. They knew. Before Maya disappeared into the terminal, a young girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Is that the pilot lady?" she whispered, eyes wide. Her mother, a woman who had stayed silent on the flight, nodded softly. "That's her." Maya caught the girl's gaze and smiled. Warm, genuine, a promise. And then she walked on, Daniel beside her, the eagle pin on her backpack catching the light with every step. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift. The executive lost his job. The influencer's sponsorships collapsed. The arrogant consultant was erased from his firm's website. The flight attendant was grounded to short routes, her ambitions clipped. Every insult, every laugh they'd thrown at her was recorded, posted, shared, and the world chose sides. But Maya didn't see it. She didn't need to. She'd faced skies filled with tracer fire, missions where a single mistake meant never coming home. Their judgment had been nothing but noise, and she had learned long ago how to silence noise. Now, standing at the edge of the tarmac with the city skyline before her, she let the wind tug at her hoodie. She didn't shield herself. She didn't shrink, because Maya Carter had never been small. And for anyone who had ever been judged, overlooked, or silenced, her story stood as a quiet promise. You are not invisible. You are not powerless. You are not alone. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.